Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to our channel, True Courtroom Stories. Before we jump in, if you enjoy what we do here, please take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and share it with your friends. It really helps us out. All right, this is episode 81, and the research for this explainer was done by the incredible Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir. Today, we've got a powerful story for you, a courtroom drama from history that set a standard for justice so pure, it literally echoes in our world today. So let's start with a massive question, one that societies have wrestled with forever. Is anyone ever truly above the law? I mean, can the most powerful person in the country, a president, a king, a caliph, be held to the same rules as you and me? It's a question that gets right to the heart of what we even mean by the word justice. And to dig into this, we're going to look at a really fascinating comparison. On one side, you've got a 7th century caliph, the leader of a massive state. And on the other, a 20th century American president in the middle of a huge crisis. Yeah, 1,300 years separate their stories, but believe it or not, they are connected by one single powerful idea that hasn't changed a bit. So here's how we're going to walk through this. First, we'll look at that modern test of a ruler's power. Then, we're going to travel way back in time to the story of a caliph and his lost shield. We'll see how a judge's bold ruling created 3 pillars of justice. And finally, we'll see how that ancient decision still rings true today. Okay, so let's start with something you might be a little more familiar with, a modern event from the 20th century that put this exact principle on trial. That case, of course, was United States versus Nixon, back in 1974. The Supreme Court made a unanimous decision that President Richard Nixon had to turn over some very incriminating tape recordings. He tried to argue executive privilege, but the court said no. It was a huge moment, confirming that not even the President of the United States gets to be above the law. Now, that feels like a modern idea, right? Something born out of democracy and centuries of legal thinking. But what if I told you that this exact same principle was put to the test in an even more dramatic way, over 1,000 years earlier, in a courtroom in the Middle East? Where did this idea really come from? To find the answer, we have to go back, way back, to the 7th century, to a city called Kufa, in what is now modern-day Iraq. And our story doesn't happen in some grand palace. It happens in a simple courtroom. Now, the person bringing the complaint, the claimant, was none other than the Caliph himself, Ali ibn Abi Talib. You have to understand how big a deal this is. He wasn't just some local official. He was the Amir al-Mu'minin, the leader of the faithful. He was the president, prime minister, and commander-in-chief all rolled into one, the most powerful man in the land. And who was he taking to court? The defendant was a Jewish citizen of Kufa. Not a rival leader, not a wealthy merchant, just an ordinary man from a minority community. The power difference here is just staggering. It's the ultimate case of the state versus the individual. So what was this huge legal battle all about? Was it about treason, state secrets? Nope, it was about a shield, a simple piece of armor. Caliph Ali said he lost his shield, and he later saw this man with it. But the man said, no, this shield is mine. And the man caught right in the middle, the one who had to make the call between the head of state and a regular guy, was the judge, Qadi Shurayh. He was famous for one thing above all else, his absolute unshakable integrity. The weight of history was literally on his shoulders in this moment. And that brings us to the most critical part of the story, the judge's decision. This is that moment where power comes face to face with principle, where a court has to choose, do you side with the important person or do you side with the evidence? So Qadi Shurayh turned to the caliph. The process was clear. The person who makes the claim has the burden of proof. The judge asked the caliph, where is your proof? Do you have any witnesses who can say this shield is yours? But the caliph, he had none. All he had was his word, the word of the head of state, but no one to back it up. And so, looking at the leader of his nation, Judge Shurayh delivered his verdict. O commander of the faithful, he said, you have no proof, and the defendant denies the claim. Judgment is in his favor. Wow. He did it. He ruled against the caliph. He chose the law over the man. The effect in that courtroom was immediate. The Jewish man was just stunned. He just watched the head of state stand trial like anyone else and lose. He was so overwhelmed by the sheer justice of it all that he handed the shield back, admitting it was the caliph's after all, and was so moved by the character of a system that could produce such fairness that he embraced Islam. You see, this story is so much more than just a cool anecdote. This single verdict helped forge the core principles of justice. So let's break down the three fundamental pillars that this ruling gave us. First, and this is the big one, no one is above the law. Judge Shurayh treated the Caliph just like any other citizen in his court. Second, the burden of proof is on the accuser. It is not enough to be powerful and make a claim, you have to prove it. And third, and this is absolutely crucial, judicial independence is essential. A judge has to be free to rule based on the evidence, without being afraid of the ruler. Without that, you don't really have justice at all. And now we come full circle. Because this isn't just some ancient story trapped in a history book. It's a living principle that has a direct line to our world today. Let's trace that echo through time, from that little courtroom in Kufa all the way to Washington, D.C. Just look at this timeline. In the 7th century, a judge rules against a caliph because he has no evidence. Then, 1,300 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court rules against a president demanding evidence. The cultures are worlds apart, the circumstances are different, but the core principle, it's identical. The law is more powerful than the ruler. So this idea of a government of laws, not of men, it's not new. The concept that justice must be blind, that it shouldn't care about your status or your power, that is an ancient, hard-won principle. It was established a long, long time ago, and it's something we have to fight to protect in every single generation. And once again, all the research for this incredible historical account was compiled by Mr. Zahir Ahmed Mir, who brought this story to light for us. And that really leaves us all with a final thought to chew on. The story of the Caliph Shield is more than just a story. It's a timeless benchmark for what real justice should look like. So the question for us here and now is, when justice is put to the test in our own time, who are the people holding the exact same story? It's about one powerful, unshakable principle. Okay, so let's just dive right in with this quote. A judge's courage can defeat the arrogance of kings. You know, that sounds kind of poetic, right? But it's not. It's a political reality. It really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today, this ancient, timeless conflict. On one side, you have the raw power of a leader, a president, a king. And on the other, you have the quiet but profound power of the rule of law. So the big question is, what happens when those two things collide? Who actually wins? All right, that brings us to our first section, courage versus power. Before we get into the juicy details of the court cases themselves, we've got to lay the groundwork. We need to really understand the core idea that these judges were willing to fight for, and that's judicial independence. Think of it like this. It is the absolute foundation of any society that wants to be governed by laws, and not just by the moods or whims of whoever happens to be in charge. So what exactly is judicial independence? I mean, we hear the term thrown around, but what does it really mean? Well, just like the definition here says, it's the simple but incredibly powerful idea that the judiciary, the courts, should be separate and independent from the other branches of government. You know, the executive, the legislative, they shouldn't be able to lean on judges or influence their decisions. Why is that so crucial? Because it means a judge's decision is based on one thing and one thing only, the facts and the law. They don't have to worry about getting a nasty phone call from the president's office or getting fired because a politician didn't like their ruling. You see, without this independence, a court isn't really a court at all. It's just a rubber stamp for the person in power. But with it, a court becomes the people's last line of defense. Okay, let's get to our first case study. This is where the rubber really meets the road. We're heading to the United States to look at the Nixon tapes case. And let me tell you, this is where that whole abstract idea of judicial independence was put to the ultimate test. We're talking about the highest level of American government. This wasn't some academic discussion in a law school. This was a full-blown, real-world constitutional crisis. It was the President of the United States versus the Supreme Court. And literally, the future of the presidency was on the line. Now, this whole case didn't just pop up overnight. It was the explosive finale to the whole Watergate scandal. You've probably heard of it, right? It all started with this seemingly minor break-in at the Democratic Party's headquarters, but it unraveled into this massive political firestorm. And right in the middle of it all, investigators found out something incredible. President Nixon had a secret taping system running in the Oval Office, recording everything. Suddenly, those tapes became the Holy Grail. They held the truth. The only question was, could anyone, and I mean anyone, even the Supreme Court, make the President of the United States hand them over? And boom, this is where the showdown happens. The special prosecutor investigating the case issued a subpoena for the tapes. a legal order, but Nixon flat out refused. He claimed something called executive privilege, basically arguing that a president's private conversations have to stay confidential for the government to function. So the case shot all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it all boiled down to one single, monumental question. Is the president so powerful that he's above a court order? Is he above the law? The court's answer? It was absolutely historic. And get this, it was unanimous. An 8-0 decision. No dissent, no wavering. They came back with one clear, powerful voice and said, and I quote, "No person, not even the president, is above the law." Just think about that for a second. It was this crystal clear, unambiguous statement that in America, the rule of law applies to every single person, no matter how powerful they are. And the fallout from that decision? It was immediate. It was massive. Just 16 days after the Supreme Court made that ruling, President Richard Nixon resigned from office. He knew the tapes would prove he was involved in a criminal cover-up. He knew impeachment was coming, and it was a sure thing. So he stepped down. A direct line can be drawn from that court's decision to the downfall of a sitting president. Incredible. Okay, so now I want you to pack your bags because we're going to travel across the globe. We're heading to Pakistan to see how this exact same struggle, this fight for judicial independence, played out there just a couple of decades later. And this is what I find so fascinating. You've got different countries, different political systems, different cultures, but the core battle between the power of the executive and the authority of the judiciary, it's identical. It shows you just how universal this principle really is. So in Pakistan, the flashpoint wasn't some secret audio recordings. It was something, well, you could argue it was even more fundamental. It was about who gets to appoint the judges in the first place. See, for a long time, the executive branch, the government, had a huge say in who got to sit on the bench. And you can imagine the problem there, right? You could end up with courts filled with people who are loyal to the government, not to the law. And in 1993, in a case that became known as the Judge's Case, the Supreme Court of Pakistan decided to take this issue on directly. And their ruling was a bombshell. It completely changed the game, reshaped the entire balance of power in the country. Just look at the key points here. They ruled that any interference from the executive in judicial appointments was flat out unconstitutional. They said the judiciary must be independent, that the separation of powers is mandatory, not optional. This wasn't just about settling one little argument. No, this decision laid down the modern groundwork for judicial autonomy in Pakistan. It was a guarantee of independence for generations to come. So let's just pause and put this all together. This is the really crucial part. When you put these two landmark decisions side by side, what do you see? It's the same message, just in different words. The U.S. Supreme Court said the law is above the president. The Pakistan Supreme Court said the judicial system itself is above the government's interference. In both situations, you had courts facing down incredible political pressure, and both of them drew a firm line in the sand, a line to protect the rule of law. Which brings us to the big takeaway. Let's get to the core truth here. Let's strip away all the specific details, the tapes, the appointments, the different countries, and just look at the one powerful idea that connects these two historic moments. What is the fundamental principle that was at stake in both of these epic legal battles? Well, here it is. In fancy legal language, it's called the ratio decidedi. That just means the reason for the decision. And the reason in both cases can be boiled down to this. Power must submit to law. Law must never submit to power. Read that again. It's such a simple idea, but it's absolutely revolutionary. It means that the whole point of law is to put guardrails on power, to contain it. It's not supposed to be a weapon for the powerful to use. Power has to play by the rules of law, not the other way around. And that is why this matters so much. This isn't just a legal theory. This principle is the ultimate shield against tyranny. It is the bedrock of what we call the rule of law. It's what ensures that justice isn't just something that changes based on who's in charge. It ensures that our rights are protected. And, crucially, it ensures that nobody, no matter how rich, how famous, how powerful they get, can ever be above the law. It's what separates a government of laws from a government run by the whims of men. So for our final section, I want to bring it full circle, right back to that idea we started with, courage, a judge's defiance. Because as we've just seen, having these amazing principles written down on paper is great, but it's one thing to write them down and a whole other thing to actually stand up and defend them when you're under intense pressure. The law isn't some kind of magic machine that runs itself. It needs people. It needs brave people to give it life, to give it teeth. And I think this is maybe the most important lesson of all from these two stories. These world-changing decisions, they didn't just happen. They happened because of the moral courage of individual human beings. Judges who were willing to look the most powerful person in their country in the eye and say no. They risked a massive confrontation, a constitutional crisis, because they chose to defend the law over personal power. It was their courage that gave the law its strength. And I want to make it clear that the analysis in this explainer, especially this incredible parallel between the US and Pakistani cases, is all based on the research of Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir, a brilliant constitutional and corporate lawyer. It's really his insight that allows us to see this common thread, this story of judicial courage that connects the legal histories of two very different but great nations. And so that leaves us with one final big question to think about. We put so much faith in our written constitutions, right? We see them as the ultimate protectors of our freedom. But what these two stories show us, I think, is that a piece of paper is only as strong as the people who are willing to stand up and defend it. So it makes you wonder, what is the ultimate safeguard for the rule of law? Is it the written constitution, or is it the courage of those who defend it? Is the true bedrock of justice found in ink on a page, or is it found in the unyielding courage of the human heart? Something to think about.